The New York Islanders and new general manager Mathew Barzal are being forced to make impossible decisions this offseason, in large part due to the mistakes of previous general manager Lou Lamoriello. On this episode of Islanders Digest, we're going to discuss why the Islanders are really going to struggle to make the offseason changes that fans want to see this offseason. But really quickly, before we get into that, we noticed that 76% of you who watch these videos are not yet subscribed to the channel. So if you're an Islander fan, you want more Islanders content just like this, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe, it's free. Our goal is to hit 1,000 subscribers before the NHL draft. So be sure to be a part of this Islanders community, hit subscribe. Now let's get right into this video's topic and really discussing why it's going to be so challenging for Mathew Barzal and the New York Islanders to make change, especially on this forward core. There also are some challenges on the defensive core, but considering that Noah Dobson and Alex Romanov are not yet signed, I think that'd be better for a later video in the offseason once we have more clarity. But the situation on forward is pretty clear, especially now that we know that Kyle Palmieri has already been extended, and this Kyle Palmieri extension really complicates things. Now, this is on this chart from Puckpedia. This is Kyle Palmieri's previous deal with the New York Islanders. He's now making $4.75 million. So he did take a hometown discount. And I do want to emphasize, as I was talking about when I made my video on Kyle Palmieri's new contract, while I understand some of the frustrations with the 2-year no trade clause, the limited clause in the second year, I don't think this is a bad value from a contract perspective. In fact, I think it's actually a pretty good deal. And frankly, I don't care too much about the no trade clause because you weren't going to trade him in the first year anyway of this 2-year deal. However, my big issue upon reflecting further is that Lou Lamoriello signed this contract, not Mathew Barzal, because you want Mathew Barzal to be able to put his stamp on this team right away. And while he was happy to accept Lou Lamoriello's contract for Kyle Palmieri, we don't know if that's what he would have done had he had the choice to go in another direction. And now with Kyle Palmieri locked into this lineup, you don't have a lot of space to make changes on this forward core. Yes, this is the last year of Anders Lee's contract. This is the last year of Pageau's contract. But other than that, most of these players on the New York Islanders are locked up long term. You are going to have to lock up Holmstrom to a longer term deal, whether that be a bridge deal or a long term deal. Likely want to see a bridge deal. The truth is, you're not moving on from Holmstrom regardless of what that deal is. So as a result, you really don't have too much flexibility on this roster year one. And while fans will say, well, easy, just trade Pageau and trade Lee and bring in 2 other faces, it might be a little bit more complicated than that. And I'm beginning to accept that there's a really good chance that this forward group, as we're looking at it right now, aside from put Casey Ciziquez to the side where Engvall is, or Duclair, as we don't know if Duclair is coming back, and instead put in Callum Ritchie, that is likely going to be the night 1 roster, unless something changes from what we're hearing right now, which is probably not ideal. The reason I say that, main reason, is in terms of projected cap space, the Islanders have $21 million, which is a ton until you realize you have to bring back guys like Holmstrom, like Siplikov, and also sign Alex Romanov and Noah Dobson to new deals. While the Islanders will not need more cap space to handle those situations, after those situations, that's pretty much going to eat up all the money the Islanders have, which is not really ideal for making additional additions when it comes to free agency. Where it gets more complicated, though, when it comes to trading Pageau and Lee, which is really what I want to focus on in this video. And I do think, at least coming to this offseason, it is more likely that we see Pageau go. But just looking at this depth chart, I really wonder if perhaps this is not going to happen, at least when we're thinking it is going to happen in terms of at the draft. Because when you look at it, currently Pageau is your second-line center. And yes, you can move Barzal into that second-line slot and then have him play separately from Horvat. But then this team is really going to be lacking offense, as pretty much the only time that Islander games have been exciting in recent memory is when Barzal and Horvat played together. Still, you could move Pageau, but already it's really looking like that would really weaken the lineup. And when it comes to what return you're going to get for Pageau, it really is questionable. Now, there are teams that are going to have interest in Pageau. I'm going to link this article in the description below, as it's just more generally talking about why it makes sense for the Islanders to trade Pageau. And I want to make this really clear. It does make sense for the Islanders to trade Pageau. And let me know what you think about that in the comments below. but I'm really questioning whether or not it makes sense to do it at the draft. Yes, the draft is the easiest time to trade him if you want to move that $5 million of cap space, but I don't really know if it makes a ton of sense for the Islanders to just trade Pageau as a cap dump and really not get the maximum return. The same for Anders Lee. And now the argument you could make is if you want to make a splash in free agency for Matthew Darsh, you're going to want to make more money. But when it comes to those two contracts, I kind of like the idea of holding on to that money, at least long term, for next season and beyond, where the Islanders are going to have way more money and really have the opportunity to make a splash. And when it comes to trading Pageau at the draft with his $5 million cap, it's going to be really difficult to get a good offer. I think right now, as it stands, if you trade him at the draft, you likely are looking at a third round pick or a second round pick. And that second round pick is going to be so late that it's likely basically going to be a third round pick. I mean, looking at the teams that are interested, we know last offseason the Edmonton Oilers were interested. They likely will be interested again in Pageau for a year if the Islanders retain half. But they don't have a ton of assets, and there are other teams that are interested in a player like Pageau. One team I actually think makes a lot of sense is the Toronto Maple Leafs, but they're another team that has no first-round picks in the next 3 years. They don't have a lot of young players, which is what the Islanders want. Of course, you could trade him for a second-round pick, but this is where I think this decision gets really challenging for Matthew Darsh when it comes to Pageau and Anders Lee. Their values are going to be higher at the trade deadline. That just makes common sense. Right now, in the offseason, teams are going to have a lot of different options to get third-line centers. They are pretty abundant. But as the season goes on, there are going to be less third-line centers available, especially when you get to the deadline. I mean, we saw how much Brock Nelson got at the deadline for the New York Islanders. I guarantee you that offer for Callum Ritchie and a first-round pick would not have been available at the beginning of the season. That was available that late because the Avalanche got desperate. Now, there's a lot of desperation for first-line centers as you get closer to the deadline. I mean, just look at what the Toronto Maple Leafs paid for Scott Laughton. Nothing against Scott Laughton. They got a first-round pick for him. Granted, there was some retention done by the Philadelphia Flyers. That is insane value for a player who plays third-line center, and that's why I really question if it perhaps makes sense for the Islanders to kind of roll out this lineup in the beginning of the season, especially considering Pageau playing second-line minutes with Holmstrom and Palmieri is likely going to have more points and perhaps raise his value even further going into the deadline, and where you can perhaps maybe hope to get a first round pick as opposed to the maximum offer you're likely going to get right now at the draft being a second round pick. And even then, that depends on what teams are interested in third line centers. I think the Islanders took a really big hit when the Tampa Bay Lightning signed Yanni Gourde at such a good deal because he was really looking, the Tampa Bay Lightning were really looking like a team that would be highly interested in Pageau. When it comes to Lee, the same thing goes, where if he has another 30-goal season playing with Horvat and Barzal and really proves that age is not going to be a factor, at least this season, perhaps it makes sense to move him at the deadline and hope for maybe a second or even a first-round pick as well. The challenge then comes when it comes to the truth that both these players' value is going to be higher at the deadline than it is going to be at the start of the offseason when there are so many more options, is the simple fact that if you keep both these players and wait till the deadline, then you're basically running back the same exact Islanders forward core, which is exactly what fans did not want to see Lou Lamoriello do. But when it comes to where these players are going to have more value, that's where it makes more sense, at least for me, in my opinion. Now, if you get a big offer for Lee, and Lee's going to be even more challenging because he is the captain of the team, and is that the first trade you want to make if you're Matthew Darsh? But if you get a big offer for Lee, maybe you consider it. The truth just is that you're probably not going to get this huge offer when it comes to draft because teams are just not going to be as desperate when it comes to being around the draft as opposed to the way they are willing to overpay when it comes to the deadline. And both these contracts also pay a factor into that, where realistically, if you're moving both these players at the draft, you likely want a replacement. Because when it comes to trading players at the deadline, teams are willing to kind of just suck it up and then just bring up a younger kid at the end of the season. But when it comes to playing a full season, I don't think the Islanders are going to be willing to just give up Lee or Pageau and not get anything in return, which really makes it more complicated to trade them now in the offseason because if you're trading them, then you also have to go in and sign a free agent, which means you can't retain the salary that you're going to want to retain at the deadline to maximize your assets. At least that's the way I'm looking at. Perhaps I just am overthinking, but let me know what you think about this idea that it might make the most sense for the New York Islanders to hold off on trading Pageau and Anders Lee. And I know there is risk involved when it comes to waiting to trade a player at the deadline. They can get hurt, things like that. But that's also why you get more return on the deadline, because there's more risk, and if the player plays well, it can pay off. And frankly, if the value for Pageau is going to be a second-round pick from the Toronto Maple Leafs or something like that from a contender, because frankly, these contenders just don't have a lot of value to offer the Islanders, I really wonder if it makes more sense to hold him until the deadline, allow him to play, at least start this season as your second-line center, allow Barzal and Horvat to play together. I know people are going to say they want Richie to be the second line center, and I agree. I want him to be the second line center by the end of this season. Frankly, I don't think he's going to be ready for that right away. They should put him in a sheltered role, playing on the third line with Casey Ciziquez, and perhaps if he proves himself once you trade Pageau on the deadline, then you can move him. Love to hear your thoughts on this. I know this is not going to be a very popular thing for the Islanders to do, to bring back the same team, but it's starting to look like that might be the best option for I'd love to hear your thoughts on that in the comments below. As always, I'll be active with you guys, respond to your comments, and really listening to what you have to say when it comes to this. As always, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. My name is Patrick Nilan. This is Islanders Digest. Let's go Islanders.